Thank you, Devin. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in. My name is Huri Gedelekian, and I am the chair of NGO CSW New York. And I am so pleased to welcome you for our May monthly meeting. As you all know, if you have been following us since CSW, we have shifted our focus and really want to use the outcome document for the best possible way. We were so pleased with the results. Of course, it's never perfect. We don't think that we have reached our goal yet. I don't know if we'll ever be able to. Maybe we should stay hopeful. But this year, I think I'm so grateful for our team, our global planning committee, our sisters in the regions, member states who stepped up and helped us in such incredibly open-armed way. And we really did achieve a lot. So now we want to see what we can do with what we have been able to accomplish, and how can we use this outcome document instead of just push it aside or get angry and say, okay, we didn't get what we wanted. And as you know, last month in April, we had an incredible monthly meeting where we had at least 3 or 4 member states, wonderful civil society members, and UN women to discuss what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do better. And we have taken that into consideration. We've been meeting behind the scenes with my team at NGO CSW New York to see how we can shift our focus. And then we thought it really is important, because last month you guys heard the Advocacy Research Group, which has turned out to be one of our most important subcommittees, if you want to call it. Not that it was always important, but we're really putting our efforts and power behind them and supporting them, because we need to make a change in the way we work and we advocate, and bring your voices in, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. But today we really want to focus in on the Advocacy Research Group, which was a global effort led by Susan O'Malley, Erica Higby, and Ivy Cook. And we added a new member, which you will meet today, Ani. And we're still evolving this committee or this group. And you will hear again more about that by the end of our season in June. But today is really about what happened starting even last summer, how this group came together, consulted with global experts, and made recommendations. We met with member states. Anyway, I feel like I'm giving away the punchline already, because this is their spiel. I just want to welcome you all, and I just want to thank you all for your support. I want to hand over the mic to Ivy Cook, my vice chair, my right arm, and have her start leading this meeting. And then I will see you in breakout sessions. I will be engaging with you in the chat. So please, if you have any questions, any comments, and like I said, if this is your first time, please let us know in the chat, and you are more than welcome to join us. Thank you for being here. Ivy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Huri, and it's great to be with all of you this morning. And I'm not going to speak long, because I'm actually going to be handing it over to Pamela, who's going to be giving the welcome and introduction to the topic today. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And I'm sorry, I'm hoarse. My allergies are acting up. But welcome to what will prove to be a compelling NGO CSW session examining the outcome document for CSW66. Huri is very modest, because she really drove the executive committee to take a deep dive into what was happening with the outcome document and how we were going to keep it alive as a living, breathing document that can influence our advocacy all the way to COP27 and beyond. So that's when we changed the format of the meetings, and we decided that NGO CSW New York was going to actually begin from this point forward to focus solely on the CSW, building up to CSW, and then after CSW, looking at the outcome document and translating it into a roadmap for advocacy. So building on last month's debrief on the outcome document, today's meeting will access the documents in light of the 7 recommendations made by the ARG group after consultation with 10 missions. And the 10 missions were critical to the development of the recommendations. Then, after reports from representation from regional representatives who served on the ARG, you, our audience, will have the opportunity to have your voice heard in breakout groups. We appreciate you being here and look forward to hearing your reflections. We stand in solidarity as we move forward in our advocacy for a better tomorrow. Ivy, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for your words and opening. I also give an applause as Huri. And I wanted to, sorry, as I get my updated agenda together. We wanted to, first of all, start with UN Women, who is the Secretariat of the CSW. And today joining with us is Seaman Kwayem, and she's the Policy Advisor of Sustainable Development for UN Women. And she was instrumental this year in the priority theme being around climate, and she supported the Agreed Conclusions process, and she's going to share with us there's going to be a PowerPoint presentation on UN Women's role and a perspective within all of this. So I'm going to hand it over to Simin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ivy. And I'm hoping that you or one of your fabulous team might be able to share the PowerPoint.
Yes, I think Devin is on that. I think she has the email with the PowerPoint, so she'll be putting that up shortly.
So I would just like to take this moment then to thank NGO CSW for the invitation to UN Women to participate in this monthly meeting. It's an invitation that we very much appreciate, and we are committed to working across multiple partnerships and with enthusiasm and solidarity to ensure, as was said by Huri before, that the CSW66 Agreed Conclusions are not just simply another document that is prepared through intense efforts across governments and civil society with the support of the UN system and then get shelved. And so we really join you in your call for making sure that these agreed conclusions are actually implemented on the ground for the benefit of women and girls and others everywhere. So I would also like to point out that I'm quite indisposed this morning, so I may not be able to join you for the entire session, but I will do my best. Wonderful. So I see that the PowerPoint is there. Thank you, Devin. So I'm going to focus this short presentation on one assessment of the challenges and the gains in this year's CSW Agreed Conclusions. May we have the next slide, please? So as you all know very well, UN Women supports the Secretary General in the preparation of the CSW priority and review theme reports. And I don't need to remind all of us once again about the priority theme, but I also do want to indicate that the review theme for this year's CSW was Women's Economic Empowerment in the Changing World of Work, which was a review of the implementation by member states of the agreed conclusions of the 61st session of CSW in March 2017. And this is an important point because within the CSW process, there is this opportunity to clearly review and assess how agreed conclusions from past CSWs are actually taken forward and implemented on the ground. So this year for the review theme, some 60 member states submitted information on how they implemented the agreed conclusions on women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. And I invite all of you, if you haven't already, to take a look at the review theme report, which is available along with the priority theme report in 6 UN languages on the website. Next slide, please. So as we all know, the negotiations of the agreed conclusions of this year's CSW were successfully completed, although there were moments when we thought they may not be, on the 25th of March. And of course, the text is also available on the website in all 6 UN languages. May we have the next slide, please? So I'm going to start with a few challenges and then go on to the really substantial gains that we can see in the agreed conclusions. One of the challenges was that there was very little support for the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which was based obviously on the path-breaking Human Rights Council resolution from last year. We really thought that this would be an opportunity to basically clarify and articulate this right in terms of women and girls and gender diverse peoples. This was not successful, as you know, although I must say that through negotiation and persistence, the principle was upheld. And so we see in the agreed conclusions the following: promote and protect the rights of all women and girls related to the enjoyment of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and adopt policies and programs for the enjoyment of these rights, including by addressing the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters. So this was obviously a compromise, but I think it's important to note that the principle is there. And as you all know, significant time was spent in the negotiations on divisive issues, including multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, sexual and gender-based violence versus violence against women and girls, whether we can even use the term gender responsive, and also 1325 and the whole Women, Peace and Security agenda was up for grabs once again. Women in all their diversity continue to be contentious, as was the whole discussion around families versus families and women human rights defenders. There was protracted negotiation, as you know, on the climate paragraphs, which there had been an agreement from the outset that we would follow the agreed language from the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact, but contextualize it very firmly within the priority theme. There was a very intense back and forth over several days on this, and finally, on the at the final hour, these climate paragraphs were agreed as a package. May we have the next slide, please? So, despite the flurry and back and forth of the negotiation of the climate paragraphs, We do think that there is strong language in the agreed conclusions on the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters on women and girls, including Indigenous women and women with disabilities and other groups of women. There is a strong call, emphatic call for the integration of gender perspectives across all aspects of policies and programs in the climate change and resilience and disaster risk reduction space. There's a commitment for increasing gender responsive investment in climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs through multiple means. Next slide, please. There is improved language on gender statistics and sex disaggregated data in the gender environment nexus. And there is I think, a real recognition of the role and contributions of civil society organizations, especially women's, young women's, girls, youth-led, grassroots and community-based organizations, rural, Indigenous and feminist groups, women human rights defenders, and a first reference to women journalists and media professionals. However, and again, this is a challenge, we were disappointed that there was no direct reference, unless I'm missed something, to women environmental human rights defenders. There is reference to health, universal health coverage, and sexual and reproductive health issues in both the preambular and operative parts of the text. And I've just cited one instance of this, but as in past years, we were not able to support member states to include a clear and definitive reference to sexual and reproductive health and rights. May we have the next slide, please? And then I would say that one of the most important aspects of these agreed conclusions, and following on what member states or parties to the UNFCCC agreed in the Paris Agreement, that we do have language on fostering a gender responsive, just transition towards inclusive, low greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient development and a sustainable economy. There was, as you all know, a lot of sort of opposing views on the inclusion of terms such as the green economy and the blue economy, and basically the whole discussion on reducing or eliminating fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies. But nevertheless, we did get this language on protecting and promoting the right to work and rights at work of all women, and ensuring their equal access to decent work and quality jobs in all sectors, including sustainable energy, sustainable fisheries, sustainable forestry, sustainable agriculture, and sustainable tourism, and supporting the transition from informal to formal work across sectors, ensuring women's and girls' access to sustainable livelihoods in the context, as the Paris Agreement says, and calls for a just transition of the workforce. Next slide, please. So again, as all of you have mentioned and are working towards already, now that these agreed conclusions are adopted, it's really important that they be implemented, that they be taken up for all purposes, including for advocacy, for policy change, for new programs, ensuring that women's organizations of all sorts have access to financing for climate, environment, and disaster risk reduction action. And so UN Women hopes to work together with governments, with civil society organizations, and across the UN system to make sure that this happens. And we really need to make sure that this support for the gains of the CSW66 agreed conclusions are felt at the country level and in the Stockholm +50 and COP27 processes. And I think that there I come to an end. I believe that's the last slide. So I thank you very much for the invitation, for listening to us. We're really stand ready to cooperate and work in solidarity with all of you. Thank you very much.
Seaman, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview of the agreed conclusions. And thank you for giving us the homework to also not forget the review theme. I think often we don't think about that. And that is a very important piece, like you said, of the implementation by member states. And that this year there were 60 of them. So we will definitely do our homework and check up on that as well. And then the many gains that you've outlined and the continued challenges that we are very much aware of. I think we go through them every year, but that we're chipping away, I believe, I hope, through every discussion, every negotiation process. So thank you very, very much. And there is a question. I don't know if you have just a minute to cover a question, seeming as I know that you're not, you cannot stay with us too long, but if you have just a minute to spare, there was a question about, may I request you to speak a little bit on the accountability mechanisms tracking implementation was the question.
Sure, I may not be able, thank you for the question, Jillian, and I may not be able to answer it fully. The one mechanism that that we know about that I mentioned in the talk, and also to that Ivy referred to, which is the process that's inbuilt to CSW, which is the review theme report, which asks member states to make an assessment of how they dealt with the agreed conclusions from a past CSW, and to give real examples of policies, programs, of lessons learned, of good practices of implementing those agreed conclusions. I have found, as part of the UN Women team that supports the Secretary General in preparing these reports, that sometimes there are some really interesting and good surprises when we look at how member states have implemented these agreed conclusions. And particularly in the one that I mentioned about the most recent review theme, which is women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work, it was really interesting to see the different measures that member states had taken to implement these agreed conclusions, particularly in the context of the social and economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic and its huge and disproportionate impact on women and girls. So I would really recommend that NGO CSW review that report, and also work at the country and national level with national governments when they're preparing their submissions for next year's review theme report, for example, which will be assessing member state implementation of the agreed conclusions from CSW62 on rural women and girls. So this is, I think, an important task. It's less well known because the priority theme does take priority and everyone pays attention to that. But it's really, as you say, in terms of accountability and implementation, really important to do this work on the review theme as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Huri did write a note there that we are dedicating our June monthly meeting all about implementation on the ground and what we are doing at the national and regional levels. And we thank you. There was a request about your presentation being posted on our website. I mean, we will be sharing our recording, so I believe that that will capture the presentation. Susan, is that okay, or? I'm frozen, so I hope that you guys can still hear me.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So I think I will move along in the agenda and thank Simin for her time and or all of her efforts behind the scenes that we're not aware of, but we know you're working so hard for all of us. I'm sorry, I'm distracted because my side of the screen is totally frozen, so.
We can hear you all right.
Oh, wonderful, good. Thank you for confirming. I'm going to hand it over. So Huri gave a really good introduction already and a teaser on the Advocacy Research Group. And so there are 4 co-chairs actually, Susan O'Malley and Ani Karapetian, sorry, will be speaking, and Erica and myself are the other 2 co-chairs. You're going to hear from Erica a little bit later, but I'm going to hand it to Susan and Ani to share a little bit more on their analysis of the agreed conclusions and the recommendations that were put out by the group. Thank you.
So I should start.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
fine.
I'm in my backyard and I think the connection will be okay, but if it's not, I'll run inside. If the birds are too loud, let me know, because the birds can take over. You can see the dogwood is just starting to bloom over there, but anyway, all right. Siemens comments in the PowerPoint were so useful in moving forward. I'm very excited about it. My report, I think, is in comparison, but here I'll start. Last week, a friend from the US mission, she was actually one of the negotiators, said to me, "This is the best outcome document in 10 years." I thought that was very interesting. And I think she is right if you look at the last 10 years. The 7 NGO CSWs in the regions that make up the NGO CSW Advocacy Research Group, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Asia Pacific, Armenia, Geneva, Vienna, and New York, contributed greatly to this, as did many other NGOs, many at this meeting. I want to briefly describe what the Advocacy Research Group did differently this year. We started by admitting that we had not been very successful last year in getting our concerns into the agreed conclusions. So the NGO CSW New York Executive Committee decided that we would meet on Zoom with the CSW66 Bureau members and other member states, friends, to figure out how we might be more successful. We also sent a request to all members of the Commission on the Status of Women and received several requests to meet. We were careful to have regional representation. We were told, here we go, to keep our interventions short. Always before, we had done our version of the agreed conclusions and sent it to all members of the Commission in January. Please, they said, just send us 3 recommendations. We sent 6. We don't have time to read long documents, they said. Many missions have only 2 or 3 people, and English is not their first language. And send it to the SG in November, before his report comes out, to UN Women in November, and all members of the CSW66 Bureau in November. Also, don't spend so much time with the big countries. Small countries have a vote too, and spend less time with the West. That's what they told us. After studying together during the summer, wonderful readings and discussions and invited speakers, the Advocacy Research Group did as we were told, getting our recommendations on the priority theme, the achievement of gender equality, and the empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. We got them out in November. And we received acknowledgement from the SG office and thanks from several member states and UN Women. Later in January, we did negotiating briefs for each recommendation that include a UN precedent language, data, relevant data and reports, good practices, that was very useful, and legal environments. The recommendations and briefs may be found on the NGO CSW New York website. Look for Advocacy Research. And then again, we sent them to the SG with the briefs this time, the CSW66 Bureau, UN Women, and all member states. They said, don't stick to the commission, send it to everybody. And we did. So just briefly going through them. And after hearing Seaman, I think maybe we were too positive, though this is interesting. I guess we were so, in contrast to last year, which seemed to be such a disaster, this was so much better. The agreed conclusions is particularly strong in the participation of women and girls of all ages that include rural, indigenous, and people with disabilities at the local, community, and national levels. And also they were strong on strategies for disaster reduction and resilience. Those are our first two recommendations. But we expected that those topics would be covered well. The third one is on migration. Migration so intimately connected with the climate crisis. Thank goodness they made that strong connection. Our recommendation 3 received more, that migration received more attention than it had in any previous agreed conclusions. We were particularly pleased that the discussion on disaggregated data included birth and marriage documentation, so crucial to displaced women in formulating evidence-based policy. Very, very pleased. Recommendation 4, in addition to job training, what we wanted, what we emphasized was the need for education on the climate crisis, including mitigation and adaptation strategies in school curricula. School, all ages. That it was included in the agreed conclusions. Here we used the best example, Kenya's Institute for Curriculum Development that integrates climate change in the national curriculum at all levels as a good example. I think that really helped in getting it in the document. Recommendation 5 on debt reduction, Rosa Lizarde will cover when she speaks next. The agreed conclusions devoted much discussion to this, which was interesting and important. But we asked for debt cancellation and no more loans for the Global South, only grants in the future, so there would be money to deal with the climate crisis. This is all from my education, really, from Rosa and her friends. This is probably more than one can ask to be included in an agreed conclusions. But we do advocate strongly for this. There was always the tension to advocate for things we knew were probably impossible, but we want to push the envelope. Finally, recommendation 6, advocating for the elimination of legal barriers to women, including widows, concerning inheritance and land ownership, was mentioned positively at least 4 times in the document. Linda Wittong, who researches UN precedent language for us and was working with Seroptimus International during the negotiations, successfully countered a campaign by a country that was arguing that women and land was not a topic that was relevant. And according to Linda, they cited the UN precedent language and used our recommendation 6 and actually mentioned it on the floor. There is other welcome language in the agreed conclusions, such as women human rights defenders, including journalists. Yes, that probably could have gone further, but it was there. Universal access to sexual and reproductive health care and psychological support. Ending FGM and early marriage, collective bargaining, menstruation protection. The use of the word quota, I don't know if I've ever seen that word used in an agreed conclusion. The inclusion of women of all ages that I hope that I hope other people will speak to. Also, there's missing language and concerns that I hope, I don't know if people are going to address those or only the positive things. I'll start with one, and I hope people bring up others. One is the working group on girls' request for more urgency in dealing with the climate crisis. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Susan. I'm not sure, Ivy, if I should take over.
What? You're supposed to speak.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was asking if Ivy has any feedback, but I'm happy to continue. Actually, it was a great segue to youth perspectives on key issues affecting women and the work that the youth research team did. Just a quick hi to everyone. Super excited to be here. I'm, as Huri mentioned, a new co-chair of Advocacy Research Group, and I'm leading the youth research team. A super quick about the work that we did and how we approached our research and what was different from last year. So we have a small team working on the issues that affect young women and girls. Similar to last year, we created a survey, but what was different this year, we created a Spanish and English versions, and it went out to 28 countries. We had responses from 48 different people, and it was an amazing and overwhelming response and knowledge that we incorporated into our research findings. In parallel to survey, we also conducted research. So you might remember both Susan and I think Ivy mentioned we had 6 recommendations. And what the youth research team did, we looked into the 6 recommendations and tried to understand what are the youth perspectives on each and what is the lens we can add from young women and girls' perspective. As Susan mentioned, and a lot of other people mentioned, and I'm sure we'll keep mentioning today, it was a very encouraging outcome document and agreed conclusions. And Susan, you were surprised that your friend called it the best in 10 years. I was reading an article and it was calling the agreed conclusion a groundbreaking document. I'm not sure about groundbreaking, but I would go over and talk a little bit very quickly about what we found encouraging in terms of language for young women and girls. First of all, it was very encouraging to see the recommendations, and there was a specific recommendation, the 21st, that called for creation of space for youth, especially young women and girls, to participate in shaping decisions for climate action and climate change. And of course, you know, young women and girls are such a force in advancing climate action and climate justice, and youth leadership was highly visible during CSW66. So kudos to all the young women and girls who are actively advocating to include the language on young women and girls, which was present in the agreed conclusions. And very briefly about what I found a little bit discouraging and what we still need to work on and push for. Susan, you mentioned our recommendations, and if folks look at our recommendation 5, we're trying to understand what we can push for and advance in terms of financial support for migration and adaptation to climate change for women in Global South. And it's very interesting that our survey responses, so the most passionate response we got from our survey respondents was for this specific recommendation. And that was acknowledgement of lack of support from the global north to the global south, and when the funds are available, young women and girls are not specifically targeted, but we know they are very disproportionately affected. So we noticed a very passionate response and call for this, and I'm afraid it was not, climate justice was not tackled in the agreed conclusions as we would have hoped. And I think it's across all points and not only specific to young women or girls, but I wanted to mention because it was such an important point for our respondents and people who engaged with us and our researchers as well. But wanted to thank the team and hope this was helpful. I'm happy to continue the conversation offline, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Ivy, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ani. And Huri had put a note, and it reminded me, actually, we didn't introduce you. You are our newest member of the executive committee of the NGO CSW New York as a member at large. So you have another big role that you have as well as co-chair of this group. So thank you. And I didn't introduce your organizations, which I'd like to do. Susan is with the International Alliance of Women, and Ani is with, oh no, that is totally wrong. Oh, I was thinking of Soon Young, but Soon Young and Susan are different people.
We can jump in with ours, Ivy, if you don't have the list. We don't want to put the pressure on you, so. I think Ivy's frozen, but didn't want to put the pressure on Ivy. I'm representing Armenian International Women's Association, and Susan can jump in with hers, I'm sure.
International Federation of Business and Professional Women.
Thank you so much. Sorry, my internet is really choppy today. So I have to keep it moving along. And Rosa is going to speak next on the section specifically around another one of our global director of the Feminist Task Force and the co-convener of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. Rosa?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivy. I don't know if it was my internet or your internet, but it cut out where I was going to be speaking on where finance came in the agreed conclusion. So I want to thank Susan and the Advocacy and Research Group, of which I was a part of, particularly for the fact sheet that was on the issue of debt as an intro to this area. The recommendation is financial support for mitigation and adaptation to climate change for women in the global south through dedicated funds, debt cancellation, grants instead of loans, and reparations from the global north that privilege local ecosystems, indigenous knowledge, and youth leadership. So as Susan mentioned, that was quite ambitious. And yes, we were and are pushing the envelope. But let me just say that making the debt and climate connection was really important for us, starting the process back in September. And I would ask that if Devin could dig up that video link, because if you have not seen that September monthly meeting that made the connection between a growing debt and the climate and disaster risk reduction issues, that is something that I think all should see. Our colleagues, experts on debt, were involved in that session, which was really important, let's say, in pushing the envelope and making those linkages outside of the normal area, which is the UN process on financing for development, which is an area that I work as Ivy mentioned, as a co-convener for the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. And we work closely with the civil society group on financing for development in that process. Now, just to say that financing for development process followed this CSW. So it was really good to have a space where we can continue some of the gender linkages to financing for development in the FFD process. In April, as we mentioned way back and throughout the CSW, we want to ensure that the CSW is not 2 weeks, that it continues, that we keep those issues alive throughout the year, and this is one way to do it. So we worked on developing that recommendation and that fact sheet, and please take a look. I know that the link is there. And so when we look at the agreed conclusions and see, okay, you know, how did we fare? Where were the challenges? And Seaman mentioned some aspects, and thank you so much for that. And it was great to have you give that analysis. I think one of the points that I saw that was really kind of upfront was a reference to the Declaration on the Right to Development. And this is important because the right to development, the declaration was from 1986. Just a quick aside, it's one of the precursors to the financing for development process. And it was really important because it was a process that was led by the Global South countries. And that's really important for where we are now in the financing for development process, which, you know, we are, as mentioned, trying to ensure that the feminist movement, the women's movement, is integrated in supporting this process because it has become weakened over the years. And at the end, I'll let you know about what you can do. But anyways, there is a reference to that. There's also a reference to the most recent global conference on financing for development, the International Conference on Financing for Development, which took place in Addis Ababa in 2015. And of course, that's very important because that's where the financing stipulations around the SDGs also took place, coming right before the SDGs were adopted in 2015. So overall, the agreed conclusions, you know, just a couple of points and I'll get into more specifics. They raise the concern that women and girls, particularly those in developing countries and small island developing states, the SIDS, are disproportionately affected by the adverse impacts of climate change, environmental degradation. And that point is important because we're talking about small island states and developing countries. Further, it stressed the urgency of eliminating persistent historical and structural inequalities, and those are connected to, and it stressed this as well, racism, stigmatization, xenophobia, and unequal power relations between women and men, but also, you know, between and among countries, and pointing out about discriminatory laws and policies, negative social norms, and gender stereotypes. It also stressed the unequal sharing of unpaid care and domestic work around domestic work and the connection also with gender-based violence, around eradicating poverty and disadvantages in access to resources, social protection, and public services. And this is, we know, very, very important, and important to mention about the unpaid work in domestic care, because under COVID, that all of that was highlighted. So if we look at the agreed conclusions, we see a very large section on expanding gender responsive financing. And so just to point out, as Seaman mentioned, you know, there are certain processes that take precedent over certain areas. And as was mentioned, you know, we in the CSW we have to follow agreed language of the Paris conference and the Glasgow meetings, in the same way that we have to follow certain areas around financing for development. So some of the language here in the gender responsive finance is really great, but you know, it's language, it's not action, and we need governments to take action. So it's here and it's great, but for example, one of the first mentions is about increasing the gender responsiveness of investment in climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs by scaling up, right? Here it mentions technology transfer, capacity building, and the mobilization of financial resources from all relevant sources, including public, private, national, international resource mobilization and allocations. That's very overall general language. Of course, we want to ensure, you know, public financing. Private financing could mean blended financing, which is in the form of loans. And again, that brings us to this issue of debt, which we have seen increasing debt, especially in Africa and countries of the global South. Agreed conclusions also urge developed countries to fully implement their respective official development assistance commitments. Okay, this includes a target of 0.7% of gross national income. And that's great. We want to ensure that countries fulfill and implement ODA, but that has been on the books for, you know, about 70 years. Okay, that promise, it has not been fulfilled except for a handful of countries, mainly Nordic, and we're grateful, but it's great to put this and important, but again, you know, we need action. We need to really mobilize governments to fulfill this. It calls for a ODA to developing countries and the target of 0.15 to 0.2% of their GNI for ODA, official development assistance, to least developed countries. So that's really great to include that. It calls also for strengthening international and regional cooperation, including North-South. Okay, that's general, right? That's what we have. South-South and triangular cooperation. And this is a line that's, you know, usually seen, bearing in mind that South-South cooperation is not a substitute for, but rather complement to North-South cooperation. That's kind of keeping the geopolitics in place. But it's language that, you know, comes with inviting all states to enhance South-South and triangular cooperation, focusing on shared development priorities, with the involvement of all relevant multiple stakeholders in government, and it also includes civil society, and of course it will include the private sector. It recognizes that in accordance with the Glasgow Climate Pact, the need to mobilize climate finance from all sources to reach the level needed to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, including by significantly increasing support for developing country parties beyond the 100 billion per year. Now, again, this is really based on having to follow the agreed language of Paris and Glasgow, but it's noting here as well with deep regret that the goal of developed countries to mobilize the 100 billion by 2020, it didn't take place. It didn't happen. And really emphasizing that climate finance delivery has to happen, and urging that goal to happen by 2025.
Thank you, Rosa. Sorry, I'm noticing the time and I kind of have to.
Okay, let me just
Okay.
let me just point out that in terms of some of the points we asked for, there was mention of and consideration for Indigenous people and recognizing their ancestral knowledge and practices, and recognizing their cultural, socioeconomic, and political contributions. There was also recognition around youth and enhancing financing for youth networks and organizations, and that was something that was in our recommendation. And there was also mention, very important, about the role and responsibility of the private sector, and encouraging that all business enterprises carry out environmental and human rights due diligence, taking into account the guiding principles on business and human rights. And that is extremely important. And just to conclude, I do want to emphasize that what we are pushing right now, and I want to make you all familiar and hopefully, you know, partners in advocating for this, is the 4th World Conference on Financing for Development. And it's something that was endorsed by a few countries in April at the Financing for Development Forum, but we're gaining momentum. I'm going to put in the chat a link where you can see how we're pushing this. We're mobilizing as civil society, and we want to ensure that you partake in our work. Because it includes these issues that were mentioned in the agreed conclusions, very important to promoting a feminist vision for decolonial global Green New Deal, and a feminist vision for structural transformation. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. I may not be able to join the breakout groups, but if you have any questions in the chat, I'll check right now. I haven't been able to while my presentation was taking place. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosa. So the 4th World Conference on Financing for Development is going to be our support as civil society too. So thank you so much. And the deep dive on finance, you know, so many areas that I am clueless about. So I appreciate you informing us. And I'd like to turn it over to Erica Higby to introduce her panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivy. I just wanted to mention, if everybody could make sure they're muted. I hear someone typing and bells ringing and things, just so that we can hear these.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was
people
just
from the
Skylar in the
regions.
background.
Oh, that's cute. Okay. Not typing,
that-
oh, maybe typing. Oh, got it. Okay. I'm so happy to introduce these wonderful women from the regions. We, the Advocacy Research Group, work very closely as a group and do our research and have input from them. And it's just the greatest joy to hear their perspectives and to understand the different angles of the issues that we're talking about. So I think you're going to really enjoy this. They're going to discuss CSW66 gains and gaps from the regional perspectives. So I'm going to start off in Africa from Lois Addo. She is a program coordinator for the Women in Law and Development in Africa. And Lois will be speaking to us from Ghana. So Lois, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, great.
Hello.
Thanks. Hi.
Thank you very much, Erica, for the introduction. And I will say I'm privileged to be the representative for the African region to share. Okay, sorry.
That's better. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not today in Ghana. I'm currently in Denmark attending some work-related meetings. So I will say that when the planning of CSW commenced last year, I had the opportunity to be part of the Advocacy and Research Committee group, and also to be part of the African Women Caucus group to help with the planning around the CSW Agreed Conclusions for CSW66. And I would want to share these, observations and some of the, gains we made from the African region. And I'll say, being part of the Advocacy and Research Committee group, I had the opportunity to be part of the learning sessions. One advantage that the Advocacy and Research Committee group had was we started very early with, research for our various areas that we have identified, and also looking into our respective regions to see how we could bring about key issues that affect the region to and part of the conclusions, which I would say that we had the opportunity to be, have key conclusions that bordered on Africa-related issues, and it was because we were part of the process. Also, the Africa Women Caucus, also at the early beginning of the 2021, January, we also started having engagement to see how our various networks, we had 4 networks all coming together to come up with specific conclusions bordering around the CSW Agreed Conclusion to present, to present as a body, and then to be able to come up with the final document. So we had various sections on what we could do, on what proposals from the various regions. We had feminists leading, we had Women for Change, we had WELDAF, and we had other consultants also being part of these processes who were able to share their knowledge on the thematic topic and also share the various positions each region in Africa. Africa is a very big region, so each sub-region was able to bring together for us to have pre-agreed conclusions. And the most interesting thing also that transpired in Africa was from the 14th to the 18th of March, the members of the African Women Caucus met in Nairobi, and that was the first week of CSW to, have our own mini CSW conference, whilst the main conference was ongoing in New York and all other parts of the world, to be able to, as a unified front to discuss the various issues and then to come up with the final conclusions for Africa. And I'll say we were blessed to have a 418-point demand report looking at what the conclusions from this engagement happened. So it was the Nairobi Declaration, March 2021. So CSW66 Nairobi Declaration, that was the theme for that was the name of the report, and it came from all the coalitions. 60 members gathered in Nairobi from the 14th of March to the 18th, and they had various different kinds of deliberations and came up with this conclusion, which was even shared with other members who were not even part, who couldn't have the opportunity to be part of this process. And they also were able to add on, and this is, I would say, the final conclusion that Africa had to present as its voice. The advantage of we coming together the first week of CSW and to deliberate on what really is of influence, what is of importance to us relating to the thematic theme, the CSW theme, was that it helped us all. When we are in our various spaces, it's very difficult to monitor who is really participating. It's very difficult to know the various concerns. This virtual space limits our our participation. But being together for 1 week really gave us the opportunity to have our even own deliberations, So it was a very fruitful conference that we had in Nairobi as part of CSW. And one of the key conclusions that the 418 demand points report had was that we will want to ensure that this is continued. It doesn't become a one-off thing, but every year, Africa Women Caucus gets to meet at least 1 week to deliberate on issues that is of interest to Africa as a way of addressing the shrinking space and other issues that denies the African woman the opportunity on participating fully as CSW. We identified a number of issues such as, securing visa, accommodation, the expenses and all that, as it denies a number of us from being present at New York. Next year, the proposal is we'll be having a hybrid session, and as to whether we will have all of us being able to get secured visas or finance funding to be part is another story. So we having our own space where we will be able to deliberate on our specific issues and then circulate that document among other African networks, feminist network, as a next step is something that was the first point demand. And so I want to encourage the leader, the leaders of the CSW about what we have proposed and then advancing that. And I know a few who had the opportunity to know what transpired has embraced this approach. And then we want even other regions to also consider doing a similar thing. But one of the recommendations was we would rather prefer that we meet 1 week before CSW so that we don't interfere with the ongoing activities that has been planned. So we meet 1 week earlier, have our own deliberations, have our own planning, and then have our own specific conclusions. Then we continue to New York to join the other African feminists and the members of CSW, NGO CSW team in celebrating, commemorating CSW for each year. Other recommendations that came out from this was to also ensure that we rotate CSW such that it's not always centered in New York. It should go region by region so that other regions that may have shrinking spaces get an opportunity once in a while to also host CSW and be part of the process and also have our collective voices to be heard. We also proposed center the decolonization agenda in our climate change agenda, gender equality and social justice struggle, recognizing that the legacies of colonialism and its racist and sexist ideologies and current efforts of neo-colonialism as promulgated through trade, aid, and by international financial institutions are the heart of the problem. So these are other conclusions we had. We also continue to advance intersectional approaches in our work, in our social, economic, and political struggle for the full liberation of women, recognizing that African women, girls, non-binary persons, differently abled persons do not live single issue lives. So those was another key issue that came up strongly in our conclusion. Another, I won't mention all, but I will come up with a few tangible ones, was to hold our leaders accountable and to ensure transparency in their engagement on issues on climate change. We also proposed taking up our space as African women, girls, non-binary persons, different able persons on the continent, and the diaspora in global and regional forums to tell our stories, experiences, research, indigenous and technical knowledge, and ensure decisions taken reflect and draw inspiration from our realities.
Thank you. Sorry, do you have a few more? I'm just aware of the time. So we want to make sure that we get the other regions. We really appreciate what you're saying. It's just that we just have some constraints here.
I will hold on but I will share that some of the positives
in the chat.
Yeah, okay. But okay, thank you very much. Erica, I'll continue in the chat.
Okay, thank you. If you have any concluding remarks, you're welcome to make those, but we do need to keep moving on. You're good? Okay. Thank you so much, Lois. Africa is always so inspiring, and I think this creative solution was just absolutely brilliant. And your meeting in Nairobi, I wish I could have been there. I bet it was absolutely fascinating. And so we look forward to seeing how that progresses in future CSWs. I'm going to move on now to Mabel from the Latin American and Caribbean region. She is the founder of the Foundation for Studies and Research on Women, among a bazillion other things. And she will be speaking to us from Argentina. So Mabel, are you there?
Yes, hello, good
Hi.
morning, good afternoon, good night. I'm here. Well, I want to thank this opportunity that we can share with you how in the region our feminists, we are working on that. As you know, in January, this year, we have had our meeting, regional meeting in preparation for the CSW. This is a traditional one in which UN Women with ECLAC put together the governments from the region, specifically the Minister for Women Affairs, or whatever is it, the name, and they propose to put together a recommendation that was to be follow the discussions in the CSW. This is something that it was developed since the last 7 years, and it's all together with the origin of our NGO CSW LAC. So we were always very committed, and we organized the previous meeting of the civil society and the feminists in order to present to the ministers our ideas. So our NGO, we were working on that for some months before, and we presented there and we discussed finally, and the document is agreed by more than 120 NGOs and networks in the region. So in our paper, we put many of the issues that were considered, but we have some of them that they are very important. The issue of the death and how we push that is necessary that the countries are taking this outside, because with the COVID, the death makes a problem that all the money we need to improve the condition, specifically for women and girls, couldn't be assigned because we need to pay. So for us, it was very important. That's why I suggest in the group, in the advocacy, that issue. And I work with Rosa on the group, finding how we can do that. And also in the region, ECLAC push and have strong messages saying that this was need. So for us, is something very, very important. So it was a pity that couldn't be included better in the agreed conclusions. But also there was something that we are very, very preoccupied, because as you know, in the region, we are champions on the persecution, killing of women's defenders of their territories and their places. So we have this number, is the bigger number of women killed due to defend the territories, and also, as you know, we have had the terrible issues as in the Amazon, the issue of the fire, and well, all of that, since Berta Cáceres from here, we have that. So we push and we include in our paper the need to, first of all, stop the killing and persecution of women's rights defenders for territory. Second, we say it's necessary that the governments control that those extractivist private sector enterprises, with the support of the governments, are destroy and push the women and the people outside the territories. And so we request that they were paying for that, because this was something that couldn't be only said, well, we say so sorry and nothing else. We request that. And also we request that the people could come back again to their territories. This is very important, not only for the indigenous women, but all rural women and girls. That's why for us it's so, so important. In the discussion with the ministers, we could put the issue of the right defenders, but we couldn't include or incorporate the request of the payment of the destroy. But in the CSW, we have nothing. So we were really very, very bad that no mention, as was said by the UN Women person, nothing was saying, and this was important in most of the developing countries, but in our region is very, very important. So this is something that we want to stress. And about I want to say something about the accountability, because I think we need to recognize that the review issue is not taking care. And I think also we need to have a clear issue how the countries needs to present the report about the advances. Because if not, they are saying all the good and nothing about the problems or very few issues. So this is something very important. And I think UN Women, and we need to help them, needs to be prepared to stress in that. And also we need to be prepared to do the follow-up on our countries. For this year, we have some points in our issue, but not so many, because it was most the interest also in the priority. But we need to have the other one, because it's the only way we have to make accountable. But I insist, we need to have guidelines to the countries, and we need to disseminate clearly those that they presented and those that they didn't present. And we as NGOs at country level, we need to push all of them present, because this is something important. And finally, I want to say that, as you know, we have in the region, each 3 years, a regional conference on women. The last one was in 2020 in Chile, and now we have the one in Argentina this year in November. That in 2015 in Montevideo, we prepare what we call the Consensus of Montevideo on Women Issues, and it's a very important and much more advanced than the global issues in the CSW. Now we are going to review this in Buenos Aires, and this is going to be something in which we are putting together all the, in these 3 years, all the CSW put together in order to know how they are close to our Montevideo consensus or not, and how our governments do that. Of course, this is not an easy, and one of the problems we have is that no one is supporting and financing ourselves as NGOs to do that. So, you know, this takes a lot of work, but we are going to do, and we consider this is very important, because we hope in Buenos Aires, we could go further, of course, the CSW, but also what we say in Montevideo and with the news in the 6 years that we have had. So this is how we are going to mobilize, pushing and knowing what are the agreed conclusions in these 3 years CSW, but related to our consensus of Montevideo that is much more advanced and progressive. So this is what I can say from our side. And of course, we continue fighting this in the high-level political forum, because this year we are going to have SDG 5, and we are claiming for the elimination of the death for these countries in our region, that they are suffering for all the economic impact of the COVID and how it's difficult. And we say we need to eliminate these emergencies and this payment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel. That was really very interesting. And thank you for bringing up and highlighting the importance of follow-up. I think that is how we can push and what we really need to be doing and working with UN Women in that process. You mentioned your regional conference of women. If there's a link to that, if we could share that in the chat for people that are interested. And also if there's a link for the HLPF, just for people who might not be familiar, because they are reviewing the SDG 5, I think that's really important to highlight as well. So thank you. Next, we're going to hear from a representative from the North American and European Caucus. I'm not sure how they say that, but it's Zarin Hainsworth. She is chair of the National Alliance of Women's Organizations and chair of Widows' Rights International. And she will be speaking to us from the UK, I believe. I have some of these people in the wrong country. So Zarin, please take it away.
Thanks ever so much. Yes, so thank you very much for the time. Evidently, it's not possible to share everything, but just very briefly in this few minutes, I'll try to talk about some of the work of the Europe and North American Caucus and the work on CSW, best practice and implementation from across the region, and then some of the key gains from the EAC that have not already been mentioned. So the European and North American Caucus, we can't make our minds up if it's North America and Europe or Europe and North America, it doesn't really matter. Since the new core group from 2019, it met often, started monthly meetings for the caucus as a preparation for CSW to enable all of the caucus members to become more effective and make optimum use of the opportunity of CSW. And in response to requests from members, we've developed working groups and statements. And there's no time really to talk much about the preparation we made for CSW66 because it's a whole year of work. But since what's happened since 66 is that we had a meeting in April and members were asked what kind of things they'd like to be done in order to see implementation of CSW. And they asked for a huge range of things. People are interested in many things, including abortion, the situation in Ukraine, women in conflict, and various elements of the AC. So we have these existing methods, which is the monthly briefing meetings, the working groups and statements. And there's been a schedule that's been created for the year, and that's going to be looked at the meeting of the caucus tomorrow, which it happens on the last Friday of every month. And it's open to everyone in Europe and North America. And we will focus on our endeavors to increase the effectiveness of CSW, which obviously means preparation before and implementation after. If our aim is to ensure implementation, rather than just another set of papers that merely gather dust, we have to have negotiated text brought to life. And although we can do stuff as a caucus writing letters to UN Women, other UN entities, the CSW Bureau, member states directly, etc., the most effective and sustainable way is through NGOs becoming more effective at working with their governments and understanding how they can take locally the global work of CSW. And to this end, the schedule for this year is working on achieving that. A little bit of best practice. So since CSW65 in Canada, they've initiated a rapid response team for the negotiations, and that had a number of delegates from various Canadian NGOs. And as of 66, all of that, the rapid response team are now formally attached to Canada's official delegation. In Denmark and the Nordic countries, they do try to implement the decisions from the agreed conclusion. For example, in Denmark, through their aid for their aid work, they are trying to look at work with other countries in terms of the treatment of human rights, women's rights and gender equality. They were very active this year in CSW. They were at the front of the campaign to hashtag unmute civil society, and worked with Germany, Costa Rica, Latvia on sharing in updates on the methods of work and agreed conclusions together with NGO CSW New York. In April this year, they've got an action plan to combat trafficking with 16 million euros to help the life of trafficked victims in Denmark and focus on outreach and healthcare. Regarding the USA, there's the US caucus. They work on all the elements of the agreed conclusions, especially climate, and they're trying to develop their work on building relationships with government and decision makers, building a network of expertise to collaborate around the priority issues, including climate, violence against women and education, especially for the upcoming CSW. The positives that they've highlighted was really the idea of women's participation in decision making and leadership, technology and health as a priority. And really highlight the negatives really, as far as they're concerned, is that climate change is sometimes a forgotten issue. And we're a bit fragmented, there's not enough commitment. In terms of the UK, we've got the UK Civil Society Women's Alliance. This has a text group that prepares for the zero draft by looking at the expert report and the report of Secretary General. We prepare issues papers with ideas from civil society shared with government early in the year, so sort of from the autumn, to influence the government in terms of their pre-zero draft negotiations. We meet with governments throughout the year, and we have a specific pre and post CSW meeting with the Government Equalities Officer and the Minister. We meet with the government on the zero draft, go through it line by line, give them our ideas. We have daily briefings with the government. We have a text group that looks at the change in the negotiation, and the government takes into consideration our views. They let us know the language they would like, and they share it with us in case we can share that with other NGOs to influence other countries. Post CSW, the Alliance looks at the ACs particularly, and the resolutions and the review theme statement, and highlight what is particularly pertinent to the UK. And a document goes out line by line on what we want the UK government to do. This is shared with the Government Equalities Office. There's a meeting with the government post CSW, and this year we're looking at how 65 has been implemented and what are the plans for 66. It's difficult in the UK because the situation that there is at the moment with the uncertainty of the state of the Prime Minister and trying to fight for our human rights because they want to get rid of the Human Rights Act, etc. Of course, have to mention the NGO CSW Geneva and Vienna, who of course had the consultation pre-CSW and continue to work on all the UN themes, UN entities, as well as CSW. Apart from the things that have already been highlighted, I think what is interesting is in Article 62, the Commission only urges government to look at things as appropriate rather than a more robust language, and it invites civil society to participate as long as it's taking the following actions. There was a lot of discussion about who was going to be included inter alia in this list, and probably it's quite a good list, pretty holistic really. What is good is they asked us to take action, everyone to take action to fully implement existing commitments, but they only say consider ratifying CEDAW, although they do say that they want to limit the extent of reservations. They use the language of both holistic and integrated, which is good, and also mention gender action plans, calling for these to be created if they don't already exist. And they did the review, they linked with the Sendai framework, which was good. As Susan mentioned, they talked about land tenure, which is great. And I think the work for widows is really important here, because what happened is there was an ECOSOC resolution on widows, and that followed a whole summer of activity of personal meetings with member states to help them understand some of the awareness of the issues. And that's what we really need to do, is we need to have conversations with member states, as was said, not kind of long documents, but really personal conversations to help them understand what the issues are and what effects it makes. Rosa mentioned that racism and also about funding, but what was interesting is they're talking about integrate gender perspectives into design, funding, implementation, monitoring and evaluation. So if we can call governments to account to do that, that'd be fantastic. Of course, they mentioned violence in a number of different places, including root causes, which is great, and also conflict and post-conflict that you and Women mentioned. They talk about strengthening coordination and gender mainstreaming across governments. And of course, that is one of the mandates of CSW, is to look at system-wide coordination of the UN, which is a real lack, and we really need to work on. They talk about strengthening capacity of national gender equality mechanisms, and many countries don't have those. We don't have it in the UK, for example. And it was interesting because they also had this article, Nut N, which is refrain from promulgating ideas that we don't like. There was a lot of work about representation of leadership of women, but they only mentioned providing adequate resources rather than, say, robust resources. There was a mention about migration, which is great. And also in T, when they were looking about decision making in terms of water, there was a good piece which was about toilets and so forth, and actually having proper latrines is an indicator for many of the SDG goals. Rosa mentioned investment. They also mentioned in V the target of 0.7%. Again, as Rosa mentioned, there was the north-south work. And I think she also mentioned also the funding and investments, which is great. There was also the language about building and strengthening resilience, which was in BB, which is great. And we had the mention of Indigenous women, which we lost last year, so we gained it this year. And there was also the quality, inclusive and informal and non-formal education programs, which a lot of organizations have been working for a long time. They also mentioned mental health, which was great, but they only mention the language only says highest attainable. And some countries can get out of that by saying, well, it wasn't attainable. There was a mention of accessible healthcare systems, which we've been working for, and of course, vaccines because of COVID. And I think I better stop there because
thanks, Zara. Yeah, if there's anything additional you want to put, people seem to be very active in the chat there. So if we missed any of the points that you wanted to make, you made some excellent points that we need to bring it to the local level, that we need to work with the member states, and also, as always, that the language is so important at the UN and that we really need to fight for even those small changes. So, which are actually big, but thanks so much for your input. We appreciate it. Lastly, we're going to hear from the MENA region. We have Lina Abu Habib on the line, I hope. She's a director of the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at the American University of Beirut, and she'll be speaking to us from Lebanon. Hi, Lina.
Hi, Erica. Good to see you all. And I always just to lighten the mood, I want to start by showing you the view from my office.
Gorgeous.
That Huri will recognize is the amazing Mediterranean. So I'm happy to be with you. Yes, Huri, I know you miss Beirut, and we are plotting to have you. So just a few comments, particularly, after hearing the inputs from the colleagues from the region, but also the co-chairs of NGO CSW, and also linking it with what we have in the region and how can we amplify our input for the next CSW, while at the same time pointing out to some of the main challenges. Before I do this, I just want to give you just news from our team. Jana unfortunately cannot be with us today because she has another conflicting meeting, but our youth interns, we will be joined as of the next meeting by an amazing young feminist from Libya. Her name is Muntaha. I'll give you all the details. She will be joining Carla, who's with us right now. And Muntaha will be working from us from Benghazi, from Libya, which is really amazing. This is the first time we're able to work with a young feminist from Libya. We're very, very, very excited about this. I just want to make a couple of comments related to the region. And a little bit, what are we trying to do and the comments are mostly challenges, I must say. And what are we planning to do in terms of addressing some of these challenges? The first thing is, in relation to the persisting disconnect between, CSW as a very, very important moment and a very important space, but other equally important moments. So, and what I want to put forward is the fact that we will be having in November the next COP in Egypt, and that's, I have to say, is incredibly unfortunate. The location, I mean. In conversations with sister feminist organizations, there's a lot of concern about accessibility of intersectional feminist groups, because the space is going to be entirely controlled by the Egyptian regimes at the time when women human rights defenders, a couple have been released, but many are still there. So that's a serious concern, I think. And I don't know, as as NGO CSW, how we can, how we can collectively speak out on this. We almost have back-to-back CSW and then upcoming COP, and then here we are shifting gears to a particularly oppressive setup to have the next COP. The other thing, I think Rosa spoke about it, and I think we've mentioned it, at least from our end, from the MENA region, and we will be this summer in a process of rethinking a little bit our own strategies to make sure that that we don't have a downtime between one CSW and the other. That's a challenge that we need to figure out and rethink our ways of working, what kind of additional resources we can have, and how do we address this? Because especially as and this bridges to my next point, especially as the situation of conflict, instability, and violence in the region is escalated. I mean, is escalating. I mean, don't let the picture of the lovely Mediterranean fool you, but I mean, again, the space for civic engagement for intersectional feminists is facing several challenges, escalating challenges, but mostly, and what worries us a little bit in relation to the CSW is we are seeing less and less, and that's not at the level of the CSW itself, but for us, more and more disengagement from countries where conflict is escalating. And I'm talking about Yemen, Libya, Palestine, Sudan, and that's why we're delighted to have a young feminist from Libya actually join us. The other thing that we want to explore with you, our colleague from UN Women mentioned, and that was very interesting, mentioned the hiccups, the challenges in verbiage, in the language, etc. The same, and what we, one of the things, and Huri, I think, this is something that collectively we need to understand a little bit further from this region is, and I don't know, maybe it's my own ignorance in terms of getting the information, but what has been the role and position of the Arab states vis-a-vis the challenges that our colleague from the language-related challenges and the obstacles, what has been the specific position of each of the countries? And we know from our end that usually it's the unholy alliance between Bahrain and Egypt, and who actually take up the who are at the front line of challenging everything that is related to intersectionality, to sexual and reproductive rights and health, and also in relation to migration, refugees, etc. So that's just to table on the side. We would like Huri and Ivy to have a conversation, because that will help us during this period see what are the entry points in terms of addressing these persistently conservative positions from our states. A couple of kind of question marks and things for us to reflect on. Again, as they relate to the linkages, which at least for us are not apparent, and that's probably something that I would love us to discuss, not today, but later, something to put on the table. So what about Jeff, and how is this linking to Jeff? And the other thing is, sorry, I meant to mention it when I was talking about disconnect. I can safely say that the conversation around CSW at the level of UN Women offices in the region is not a year-long conversation. And we don't see it linking to the work taking place on the ground, if you know what I mean. And that, I think, it means a lot of lost opportunities, to say the least, or not being able to carry out this conversation with the different UN Women offices throughout the year. Again, one aspect of it is that half of the countries in the region are in active conflicts, but nevertheless, it's our feeling that we're really missing on the opportunity of making CSW more of a transformative, a strong, a powerful event that takes place throughout the region. So, what now from?
I hate to interrupt you. I've hated to interrupt everybody. I've interrupted, but if you could just say a final few words. We're
I'm done. I'm done, and I think I was the quickest. I think I was.
You did very well. You did extremely well, and you brought up amazing points. I think that it's really important. If we could get a link for the GEF also in the chat somewhere, so that people who aren't familiar with that can check it out. Also, the points about doing this year long and taking it to the local level. We've had a number of amazing points made during this conversation, which is why I love the global perspective. But I think we need to wrap it up, because I know that we're supposed to be going into breakout sessions, and that should take a bit. Thank you so much, Lena. Appreciate it.
Okay, I can stop now, actually, but we have to leave you both, Carla and I, before the breakout session. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena, Zarin, everyone, Lois, and I'm forgetting someone, but we only have a little over 10 minutes for breakout sessions, and we will do that right away so that we don't waste any time. Is that good? Devin's going to do that. I see people are returning to the room and the numbers are climbing. Wonderful that you guys have stayed up until the end. I think I don't know if there's another group joining or not. But this is just a very quick closing of an appreciation of your participation. And again, this coming year for our monthly meetings of NGO CSW, we really want it to be much more engaging so that it's not a passive listening process, but that we can also hear from everyone that joins the meeting. So we'll always include a breakout session for the meetings, and hopefully people will warm up over time and will want to participate in those breakouts. I had some shy members in my group, which it's okay to listen as well, but wanted to thank everyone. And if you want to open your mics, oh yes, and if you have notes, the facilitators, please send it to Huri, and we're going to compile all of them and share it. So if you'd like to open your mics and your videos and say goodbye, hope you have a good day.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Apologies
Bye.
for the
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.